Buddy. I'm a little bit late, but here we go. We are going to continue our adventure reading W.E.B. Du Bois' The Souls of Black Folks. And let me just pull up my book, and I will post the link. So you may follow along. I should set up a nightbot. I should set up a nightbot command for that and just be like, press that for book. You know what? We're going to set that up next time. This is likely to be the last stream on my old computer. Because my new computer is done and built and sitting right down there. The only issue is that it does not have an operating system right now. And last night before I went to bed, I got the bootable USB configured to put in that sucker, but I just didn't have the time to do it today due to just my work schedule being a little bit busier and some unforeseen personal stuff that came up. So that is going to be starting next stream. I'm very excited, which I might do a weekend stream, but we'll see. We'll see. So, yep. If you're just joining, the Project Gutenberg link to the Soul of Black Folks is in the chat, and we are going to go ahead and start chapter 2, The Dawn of Freedom. Once again, it starts with a song, and once again, I will just read the song to you because you do not want me to sing that song to you. Careless seems the great avenger, history's lesson but record, one death grapple in the darkness, twixt old systems and the word, truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. It was written by Lowell. The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. The relation of the darker to the lighter races of men in Asia and Africa, in America and the islands of the sea. It was a phase of this problem that caused the Civil War, and however much they who marched south and north in 1861 may have fixed on the technical points of union and local autonomy as shibboleth, all nonetheless knew, as we know, that the question of Negro slavery was the real cause of the conflict. Curious it was, too, how this deeper question ever forced itself to the surface despite effort and disclaimer. No sooner had Northern armies touched Southern soil than this old question, newly guised, sprang from the earth. What shall be done with the Negroes? Peremptory military commands this way and that could not answer the query. The Emancipation Proclamation seemed but to broaden and intensify the difficulties, and the war amendments made the Negro problems of today. It is the aim of this essay to study the period of history from 1861 to 1872, so far as it relates to the American Negro. In effect, this tale of the dawn of freedom is an account of that government of men called the Freedmen's Bureau, one of the most singular and interesting of the attempts made by a great nation to grapple with vast problems of race and social condition. The war was not to do with slaves, cried Congress, the President, and the nation. Yet no sooner had the armies east and west penetrated Virginia and Tennessee than fugitive slaves appeared within their lines. They came at night, when the flickering campfires shone like vast unsteady stars along the black horizon. Old men and thin, with gray and tufted hair, women with frightened eyes, dragging whimpering hungry children, men and girls, stalwart and gaunt, a horde of starving vagabonds, homeless, helpless, and pitiable in their dark distress. Two methods of treating these newcomers seemed equally logical to opposite sorts of minds. Ben Butler in Virginia quickly declared slave property contraband of war and put the fugitives to work, while Fremont in Missouri declared the slaves free under martial law. Butler's action was approved, but Fremont's was hastily countermanded, and his successor Halleck saw things differently. Hereafter, he commanded, no slaves should be allowed to come into your lines at all. If any come without your knowledge, when owners call for them, deliver them. Such a policy was difficult to enforce. Some of the black refugees declared themselves freemen. Others showed that their masters had deserted them, and still others were captured with forts and plantation. Evidently, too, slaves were a source of strength to the Confederacy and were being used as laborers and producers. They constitute a military resource, wrote Secretary Cameron in late 1861, and being such that they should not be turned over to the enemy is too plain to discuss. So gradually the tone of the Army's chief changed. Congress forbade the rendition of fugitives, and Butler's contrabands were welcomed as military laborers. This complicated rather than solved the problem, for now the scattering fugitives became a steady stream which flowed faster as the armies marched. Then the long-haired man with care-chiseled face who sat in the White House saw the inevitable and emancipated the slaves of rebels on New Year's 1863. A month later, Congress called earnestly for the Negro soldiers whom the Act of July 1862 had half-grudgingly allowed to enlist. Thus the barriers were leveled and the deed was done. The stream of fugitives swelled to a flood, and anxious army officers kept inquiring, what must be done with slaves arriving almost daily? Are we to find food and shelter for women and children? It was a Pierce of Boston who pointed out the way, and thus became, in a sense, the founder of the Freedmen's Bureau. He was a firm friend of Secretary Chase, and when, in 1861, the care of slaves and abandoned lands devolved unto the Treasury officials, Pierce was specifically detailed from the ranks to study the conditions. First, he cared for the refugees at Fortress Monroe. And then, after Sherman had captured Hilton Head, Pierce was sent there to found his refugees at Fort Monroe. And then, after Sherman had captured Hilton Head, Pierce was sent there to found his Port Royal experiment of making free working men out of slaves. Before his experiment was barely started, however, the problem of the fugitives had assumed such proportions that it was taken from the hands of the overly burdened Treasury Department and given to the Army officials. Already centers of massed freedmen were forming at Fortress Monroe, Washington, New Orleans, Vicksburg and Corinth, Columbus, Kentucky, and Cairo, Illinois, as well as at Port Royal. Army chaplains found their new and fruitful fields. Superintendents of contraband multiplied, and some attempt all systematic workings was made by enlisting the able-bodied men and giving work to the others. Okay, so W.E.B. Du Bois states that basically, like, they went from being slaves to essentially being forced into army service if they were able-bodied and put to work if they were like women and children in like indentured servitude, and treating them like war contraband. That's an important thing, because it's still denying them, you know, their humanity. Like, no, that former slave who crossed the lines, came, like, who we freed from plantations, and they're now here, that isn't a person. That is a part of the Confederate military machine that we have now confiscated. So even then, even then they were like still just viewed as property. It was just property that needed to be denied to the Confederacy. I'm interested to learn more about the Freedmen's Guild, honestly, because I haven't actually heard of that. So that's going to be one of the things on the checklist, is to check out the Freedmen's Guild, Freedmen's Bureau. Why did I say guild? Then came the Freedmen's Aid Societies, born of the touching appeals from Pierce and from the other centers of distress. There was the American Missionary Association, sprung from the Amistad, and now full grown for work. You know, Amistad, I saw that they made a film. I'm sure they've made several film adaptations, but I saw the original Amistad film going over the legal case and like kind of like treating it like almost like it was like a courtroom drama, but also a period drama. It was really interesting. I'm probably going to watch that again at some point. Now with new eyes, because last time I saw it, I still thought it was good. Like, I was like, oh, okay, cool. This is a story about how, you know, like how they begun stating, like, getting the lines for emancipating all the slaves instead of just the ones that were mistreated aboard slave ships, which is all of them. But it didn't apply to everybody. But yeah, I think I might be able to get some a different perspective on it now. Okay, the various church organizations, the National Freedmen's Relief Association, the American Freedmen's Union, the Western Freedmen's Aid Commission, in all 50 or more active organizations which sent clothes, money, food, school books, and teachers southward. They did all they did was needed, for the destitution of the freedmen was often reported as too appalling for belief, and the situation was daily growing worse rather than better. Okay, so once this Pierce figure came on the scene and started organizing things and like stopped making rescued slaves, I'm not because they have in to me, the way it reads, they haven't been freed yet. Like, they're no longer slaves, but they still haven't really been given rights. They haven't been like, I don't think, if this is, yeah, this is 61, I think, if my care of slaves developed upon treasury. Yeah. So this is still before the Emancipation Proclamation. So at this point, they're still viewed as military property from the Confederacy that has been confiscated, except that, you know, this isn't just sabotaging ammo stores and that sort of thing. This is these are people, and these are people's lives, and they have needs that the Army seemingly was not equipped or willing to deal with in an adequate way. So organizations dedicated to the assistance of freed slaves came about and started sending relief. And that's good. That's a good thing. That's but we'll continue to see how this develops further. And daily too, it seemed more plain that this was no ordinary matter of temporary relief, but a national crisis, for here loomed a labor problem of vast dimension. Masses of Negroes stood idle, or if they worked spasmodically, were never sure of pay, and if perchance they received pay, squandered the new thing thoughtlessly. In these and other ways were camp life and the new liberty demoralizing the freedmen. The broader economic organization thus clearly demanded sprang up here and there as accident and local conditions determined. Here it was that Pierce's Port Royal plan of leased plantations and guided workmen pointed out the rough way. In Washington, the military government, at the urgent appeal of the superintendent, opened confiscated estates to the cultivation of the fugitives, and there in the shadow of the dome gathered black farm villages. General Dix gave over estates to the freedmen of Fortress Monroe, and so on, south and west. The government and benevolent societies furnished the means of cultivation, and the Negroes turned again slowly to work. The systems of control thus started rapidly grew here and there into strange little governments, like that of General Banks in Louisiana, with its 90,000 black subjects, its 50,000 guided laborers, and its annual budget of $100,000 and more. It made out 4,000 payrolls a year, registered all freemen, inquired into grievances and redressed them, laid and collected taxes, and established a system of public schools. So too, Colonel Eaton, the superintendent of Tennessee and Arkansas, ruled over 100,000 freedmen, leased and cultivated 7,000 acres of cotton land, and fed 10,000 paupers a year. In South Carolina was General Saxon, with his deep interest in black folks. He succeeded Pierce and the Treasury officials, and sold forfeited estates, leased abandoned plantations, encouraged schools, and received from Sherman, after that terribly picturesque march to the sea, thousands of the wretched camp followers. Okay, so as time grew on, I don't know if this is like poetic justice or irony, but the fact that captured estates that these slaves were forced to work on were being turned into like cities and like almost contained separate entities, specifically for the the assistance and everyday living of these newly freed people, and more importantly, the giving them some ability to get integrated into society, like, and even if they didn't, even if, to me it looks like this is like, okay, these are people who have only, like, some of these people at this point have been born into slavery and have no connection to what society is really like. They only live on, they've only ever lived on the plantation. They've only ever been beaten and abused and mistreated for their labor, and treated as less than human and not given their rights. That person is going to have no idea how to act in society if just given free rein. Like, if they're just like, oh, okay, yeah, you're free now. Like, what does that person do? How do they even go about figuring out what to do? And these mutual aid organizations, these setting them up, giving them land to let them continue the work that they did, but for their own personal gain, teaching them to read and write, and just like educating them on like the basics of society, getting them used to taxes, like the basic things that they would need to interact in society with other people. Like, this is the first big step to integration, to integrating them into a society, not in the sense of like the 1960s civil rights movements and like, Brown versus Board of Education and stuff like that, but just like having them have a role in society that is not abject slavery. I think I made myself clear on that. Okay, so up next. So, excuse me while I drink. Three characteristic things one might have seen in Sherman's raid through Georgia, which threw the new situation in shadowy relief: the conqueror, the conquered, and the Negro. Some see all significance in the grim front of the destroyer, and some in the bitter sufferers of the lost cause. But to me, neither soldier nor fugitive speaks with so deep a meaning as that dark human cloud that clung like remorse on the rear of those swift columns, swelling at times to half their size, almost engulfing and choking them. In vain were they ordered back. In vain were bridges hewn from beneath their feet. On they trudged and writhed and surged until they rolled into Savannah, a starved and naked horde of tens of thousands, whereto came the characteristic military remedy: the island from Charleston south, the abandoned rice fields along the river for 30 miles back from sea, the country bordering the St. Johns River, Florida, are reserved and set apart for the settlement of Negroes now made free by the act of war. So read the celebrated Field Order Number 15. So well, let's go on, and then I'll because he's about to W.E.B. Du Bois is about to say something in the next chapter, in the next paragraph about that. All these experiments, orders, and systems were bound to attract and perplex the government and the nation. Directly after the Emancipation Proclamation, Representative Eliot had introduced a bill creating a Bureau of Emancipation, but it was never reported. The following June, a committee of inquiry appointed by the Secretary of War reported in favor of a temporary bureau for the improvement, protection, and employment of refugee freedmen. On much the same lines as were afterward followed, petitions came in to President Lincoln from distinguished citizens and organizations, strongly urging a comprehensive and unified plan of dealing with the freedmen under a bureau which should be charged with the study of plans and execution of measures for easily guiding and in every way judiciously and humanely aiding the passage of our emancipated and yet to be emancipated blacks from the old condition of forced labor into their new state of voluntary industry. So some half-hearted steps were taken to accomplish this, in part by putting the whole matter again in charge of the special Treasury agents. Laws of 1863 and 1864 directed them to take charge of and lease abandoned lands for periods not exceeding 12 months, and to provide in such leases or otherwise for the employment and general welfare of the freedmen. Most of the Army officers greeted this as a welcome relief from perplexing Negro affairs, and Secretary Fessenden, July 29, 1864, issued an excellent system of regulations which were afterward closely followed by General Howard. Under Treasury agents, large quantities of land were leased in the Mississippi Valley and many Negroes were employed. But in August 1864, the new regulations were suspended for reasons of public policy and the Army was again in control. So it seems like they kept juggling responsibility. It was like, okay, when we set up programs to deal with assisting these people into becoming like being able to interact with society, things go great, and then 12 months later, politicians either publicly or nationally say, fuck it, we're spending too much money, let the military handle it. And the military just looks at them and says, move there. Well, my job's done. Yeah. So this is really interesting because for another thing is this sets up why there are so many black people in the South and in the United States South, because that's in like right after the end of slavery, the Emancipation Proclamation. The general policy, it seemed, was to, hey, you know, we just kicked all of these Confederate guys off of their land, and they are either now prisoners or dead, and this land is just sitting here doing nothing. But it was producing, you know, it was producing commerce for the Confederacy or the Union, like. And now we have all of these people who are used to doing manual labor. The only thing that will change is that we will now pay them. And then the mutual aid societies will come in and start to educate them and make sure that they're properly cared for. Sounds like a good plan. Sounds like a plan. And I guess that's like one of the things that I never really thought about in school, was just kind of like, if they were slaves in the South, and why did so many of them stay in the South? And it looks like, and this is me coming to an opinion here. This is not, I'm not backing this up with like claims of evidence, but I think it's because, one, that's where they were anyways. And it was a whole lot easier for the United States government to set them up in places where they already were, than to organize and figure out what they wanted to do, where they wanted to go, and that sort of thing. And two, people in the North probably didn't want a bunch of like former slaves coming up and living in their neighborhoods and all that kind of stuff. Like, they probably were like, well, where are we going to put them? What space? Well, I don't want them up here. They're already down there. Let them stay down there. Once again, opinion, a supposition, if you will. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. And from here, it looks like that might have been the case, especially since the government's the government was like, okay, we helped them enough, send in the army again, and then the army fucked everything up, and then they were like, okay, fine, do what we were doing before again, and it just continually gets tossed back and forth and back and forth. Just something to think about. I think. One second, gotta check on. Yeah. Fun things. Fun things. We're doing fun things here on in the geometric shape space. In the shape space, if you will. It's probably what I'm going to start calling stuff. Anyways. Meanwhile, Congress had turned its attention to the subject, and in March, the House passed a bill by a majority of 2 establishing a Bureau for Freedmen in the War Department. Charles Sumner, who had charge of the bill in the Senate, argued that freedmen and abandoned lands ought to be under the same department, and reported a substitute for the House bill attaching the Bureau to the Treasury Department. This bill passed, but too late for action by the House. The debates wandered over the whole policy of the administration and the general question of slavery, without touching very closely the specific merits of the measure in hand. Then the national election took place, and the administration, with a vote of renewed confidence from the country, addressed itself to the matter more seriously. A conference between the two branches of Congress agreed upon a carefully drawn measure which contained the chief provisions of Sumner's bill, but made the proposed organization a department independent of both the War and the Treasury officials. The bill was conservative, giving the new department general superintendence of all freedmen. Its purpose was to establish regulations for them, protect them, lease them lands, adjust their wages, and appear in civil and military courts as their next friend, aka their representation, their lawyers, that sort of thing. There were many limitations attached to the powers thus granted, and the organization was made permanent. Nevertheless, the Senate defeated the bill, and a new conference committee was appointed. Oh! Oh, I was wondering why I never heard of the Freedmen's, the Freedmen's Bureau before, and it's because that sounded too good. I was reading it and I'm like, oh, this sounds like it probably would have been okay for the time. It basically turned it into like almost state-owned slavery, almost, but except that they're getting paid, so it's not quite. But there was at least some onus on that bureau, should it have come about to like help, assist, teach, protect, and look after the interests of the freed slaves. But then Congress was just like, nah, man, who's gonna pay for that? The committee reported a new bill February 28th, which was whirled through just as the session closed and became the Act of 1865, establishing in the War Department a Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. That's basically just saying, yeah, a bureau of shit we took from the Confederates, including slaves. Holy shit. Okay, this last guy. Fucking Christ. It's Pepsi. It's what's. This last compromise was a hasty bit of legislation, vague and uncertain in outline. A bureau was created to continue during the present War of Rebellion and for 1 year thereafter, to which was given the supervision and management of all abandoned lands and the control of all subjects relating to refugees and freedmen, under such rules and regulations as may be presented by the head of the bureau and approved by the president. A commissioner appointed by the president and senate was to control the bureau, with an office force not exceeding 10 clerks. The president might also appoint assistant commissioners in the ceded states, and to all these offices, military officials might be detailed at regular pay. The Secretary of War could issue rations, clothing, and fuel to the destitute, and all abandoned property was placed in the hands of the Bureau for eventual lease and sell to ex-slaves in 40-acre parcels. Okay, this is where the 40 acres comes in, which we all famously know went stunningly well. Thus did the United States government definitely assume charge of the emancipated Negro as wards of the nation. It was a tremendous undertaking. Here, at a stroke of the pen, was erected a government of millions of men, and not ordinary men either, but black men emasculated by a peculiarly complete system of slavery, centuries old, and now, suddenly, violently, they come into a new birthright at a time of war and passion in the midst of the stricken and embittered population of their former masters. Any man might well have hesitated to assume charge of such a work with vast responsibilities, indefinite powers, and limited resources. Probably no one but a soldier would have answered such a call promptly, and indeed no one but a soldier could be called, for Congress had appropriated No money for salaries and expenses. Who is gonna pay for this shit? Not I, says Congress. You know, if they would have fucking put it under the Department of the Treasury, like they wanted to, the Department of the Treasury probably could have found some fucking money for this. And lawyers, politicians, and people might have been a bit more excited to assist with this endeavor. Now, this isn't to say that that soldiers might be ill-equipped to deal with this sort of situation, but they will only see things from a military perspective. Generally, they will generally view things, particularly from a military perspective, and that might not include things like they might not consider things that say a teacher, a politician, an organizer, like a community organizer, someone with a focus of like how governments and societies work, you know, would have different insights. And for some organizations, having a militaristic style leader really, really works. For instance, in militaries, it works pretty well, I assume. I don't know. But you can't treat everything like it's a military. Like, there isn't strict codes of authority all the time. But let's see how this turned out. Also, I'm just going to go ahead and scroll down and see how much more we have. Okay. We're about a third the way through. We're about a third the way through. It's been half an hour. So that's not bad. We're making pretty good time. Less than a month after the weary emancipator passed to his rest, his successor assigned Major General Oliver O. Howard to duty as commissioner of the new bureau. Okay, so Lincoln has been assassinated at this point. He was a Maine man, then only 35 years of age. He had marched with Sherman to the sea, had fought well at Gettysburg, and but the year before had been assigned to the command of the Department of Tennessee. An honest man with too much faith in human nature, little aptitude for business and intricate detail, he had large opportunity of becoming acquainted at first hand with much of the work before him. And of that work, it has been truly said that no approximately correct history of civilization can ever be written which does not throw out in bold relief as one of the greatest landmarks of political and social progress the organization and administration of the Freedmen's Bureau. So this young, up-and-coming, you know, good-hearted, honest soldier man comes in and is immediately overwhelmed with the duties and responsibilities that this undertaking is going to put on him. Let's see how he did. On May 12th, 1865, Howard was appointed, and he assumed the duties of his office promptly on the 15th. Well, that's not bad. That's not bad. He got the job on the 12th, and he did start. Let it not be said that he didn't give it his best, and promptest, at least. He began examining the field of work. A curious mess he looked upon: little despotisms, communistic experiments, slavery, peonage, business speculations, organized charity, unorganized almsgiving, all reeled on under the guise of helping the freedmen, all enshrined in the smoke and blood of the war and of the cursing and silence of angry men. On May 19th, the new government, so 4 days later, for a government it really was, issued its constitution. Commissioners were to be appointed in each of the ceded states who were to take charge of all subjects relating to refugees and freedmen, and all relief and rations were to be given by their consent alone. The Bureau invited continued cooperation with benevolent societies and declared it will be the object of all commissioners to introduce practicable systems of compensated labor and to establish schools. Okay, so this is another point in his favor. He's like, okay, people are people, and people are taking advantage of this situation. People are taking advantage of these vulnerable people. Fuck that. The government has allowed me to appoint commissioners in the states. And if you want to help, if you actually want to help these people, you go talk to that commissioner. If that commissioner deems you on the up and up, congratulations, you get to go in. And then I can see a problem already that that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work for single individuals in these states. Forthwith, 9 assistant commissioners were appointed. They were to hasten their fields of work and seek gradually to close relief establishments and make the destitute self-supporting, act as courts of law where there were no courts, or where Negroes were not recognized in them as free, establish the institution of marriage among ex-slaves, and keep records, see that freedmen were free to choose their employers, and help in making fair contracts for them. And finally, the circular said, simple good faith, for which we hope on all hands for those concerned in the passing away of slavery, will especially relieve the assistant commissioners in the discharge of their duties towards the freedmen, as well as promote the general welfare. So, like, he did have good intentions. Like, seems on the up and up so far. Like, he's like, we need people who are actually focused on helping these people and not just taking advantage of the situation they're in. And we need to focus on getting them to be self-sufficient in society so that they can take care of themselves and make informed choices and not be taken advantage of by people because they don't know any better, specifically because the institution of slavery ensured that they couldn't. No sooner was the work thus started, and the general system and local organization in some measure began, than 2 grave difficulties appeared, with which changed largely the theory and outcome of Bureau work. First, there were the abandoned lands of the South. It had long been the more or less definitely expressed theory of the North that all the chief problems of emancipation might be settled by establishing the slaves on the fortified lands of their masters. A sort of poetic justice, some said some. Hey, I said that earlier. But this poetry done into solemn prose meant either wholesale confiscation of private property in the South for vast appropriations. Now Congress had not appointed a cent, and no sooner did the proclamations of general amnesty appear than the 800,000 acres of abandoned lands in the hands of the Freedmen's Bureau melt away quickly. The second difficulty lay in perfecting the local organizations of the Bureau through the wide field of work. Making a new machine sending out officials of duly ascertained fitness for a great work of social reform is no child's task. But this task was even harder, for a new central government had to be fitted onto a heterogeneous and confused but already existing system of relief and control of ex-slaves, and the agents available for this work must be sought for in an army still busy with war operations. Men in the very nature of the case ill-fitted for delicate social work. Yeah, like, Like, this is what I was saying. Like, you can't really expect a whole lot of empathy and like you can't expect soldiers who are trained to be able to kill other human beings, a very difficult task mentally and like emotionally. It takes a lot to distance yourself to actually be able to take a human life. Like, there are tons of studies on this. And then say, hey, you guys, I know we're in the middle of a war, but you got to run this bureau. You got to help these people because they need help, and they did need help. But are these the right people to do that? And I bet this isn't even a dig at them. They were probably asking themselves the same question. Like, I have a war to win. We are fighting right over that hill, and you want me to put a bunch of people over there with no money, with no time, or among the questionable camp followers of an invading host. Thus, after a year's work, vigorously it was pushed. The problem looked even more difficult to grasp and solve than at the beginning. Nevertheless, 3 things that year's work did, well worth the doing. It relieved a vast amount of physical suffering. It transported 7,000 refugees from the congested centers back to the farm. And best of all, it inaugurated the crusade of the New England school ma'ams. The annuals of this 9th crusade are yet to be written. The tale of a mission that seemed to our age far more quixotic than the quest of St. Louis seemed to him. Behind the mist of ruin and rapine veiled the calico dresses of women who dared, and after the hoarse mouthings of the field guns rang the rhythm of the alphabet. Rich and poor they were, serious and curious, bereaved now of a father, now of a brother, now of more than these. They came seeking a life work in planting New England schoolhouses among the white and black of the South. They did their work well. In that first year, they taught 100,000 souls and more. So, teachers came and helped. And this is viewed as one of the 3 great accomplishments that that Major General Howard managed to get through. He was able to, at the very least, allay physical suffering, which is always good. It's always if you can stop physical harm from happening to people, you should, especially if it won't harm anyone else to do that. Especially, and you should try to seek out ways that it won't harm other people. To get to break up the like poor living conditions of people who had nowhere else to go, getting them places to live, places to work, places to be able to start learning how to sustain themselves, and then getting them education so that they can go about doing this for themselves and make choices. You need to have the information to make informed choices. And if you can't read, can't write, aren't particularly strong in the language, you've only ever been taught enough to get the job done, because any more than that is dangerous, you need that sort of assistance. Evidently, Congress must soon legislate again on the hastily organized Bureau, which had so quickly grown into wide significance and vast possibilities. An institution such as that was well nigh as difficult to end as to begin. Early in 1866, Congress took up the matter. when Senator Trumbull of Illinois introduced a bill to extend the Bureau and enlarge its power. This measure received at the hands of Congress far more thorough discussion and attention than its predecessor. The war cloud had thinned enough to allow a clear conception of the work of emancipation. The champions of the bill argued that the strengthening of the Freedmen's Bureau was still a military necessity, that it was needed for the proper carrying out of the 13th Amendment, and was a work of sheer justice to the ex-slaves at a trifling cost to the government. Keep in mind that getting the freed slaves back to work and back to producing, even if they were being paid now, is still a major economic boon. Like so like, yeah, at a trifling cost to the government, like it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's going to pay for itself. The opponents of the measure declared that the war was over and the necessity for the war measure pass, that the Bureau, by reason of its extraordinary powers, was clearly unconstitutional in a time of peace, and was destined to irritate the South and pauperize the freedmen, at a final cost of possibly hundreds of millions. These two arguments were unanswered, and indeed unanswerable. The one that the extraordinary powers of the Bureau threatened the civil rights of all citizens, and the other that the government must have the power to do what manifestly must be done, that the present abandonment of the freedmen meant their practical re-enslavement. The bill which finally passed... Hey, thanks, Egg. I really enjoyed your stream earlier. Thanks. You were playing Pokemon Legends Arceus. It was fun. I appreciate that. Thanks for stopping by. Okay. But yeah, so yeah, this is what I do when I'm not playing games. I read historical, sometimes fun, sometimes depressing literature. And I complain about unions on Twitter a lot, but I think you knew that already. Complain for unions, not against them. Complain why we don't have more unions. Just to make that clear if people are seeing this on the YouTubes. Okay, and that present abandonment of the freedmen meant their practical re-enslavement. The bill which finally passed. Oh, no. By all means. See, so this is the thing with this. And I know you're about to go chill out, so perfectly fine with that. The reason why I'm reading it on stream is because I want to talk with people about this stuff. I want to get more perspectives outside my own, and yes, more unions. Because like the reason I'm reading W.E.B. Du Bois right now is because I'm a like white cis dude in America. I cannot ever meaningfully experience what African American people in America do. I can't. So the only way for me to be able to do that in any sort of meaningful way is to hear, like understand the context, like gain context, gain insight, and like just relate to people who have to face this, like these experiences, and understanding how it happened and why it happened is an important step on that. The other reason I'm reading it is like maybe people can't sit themselves down and like force themselves to read. Like, I know that's hard for a lot of people. It's not hard for me. So I will sit here and I will read it at you or at a viewer, and then just kind of like give my takes. And then if someone comes in with a hot take and we get to talk about it and discuss it, and maybe I see a different point of view, maybe they see a different point of view, more understanding is good and better than most. So and also, like, if I didn't want people to interrupt, I would just release this as a as an audio book. This is in the public domain. I could do that if I want to. Yeah, no problem. Hey, I appreciate it. And honestly, as long as people are enjoying it, that's fine with me. Like above all, I'm doing this for myself. But if other people can get use, yeah. No worries. I gotcha. But yeah, but if other people can get use out of it, then sure, go for it. Even if it's just hearing about the ideas, it's a good first step. I need to shave. This is getting a little ridiculous. Now that I'm seeing myself on camera, I'm like, eee. Okay. Anyways, sorry about that. Yeah, meant their practical re-enslavement. The bill, which finally passed, enlarged and made permanent the Freedmen's Bureau. It was promptly vetoed by President Johnson. So this is the other thing, is like I get to laugh at like just overtly fucking racist bullshit that happened in the country, and people are pretending like it's over, like just because the Emancipation Proclamation happened, everything's fine now. Just because civil rights happened, everything's fine now. Just because the Million Man March happened, just because on paper people have equal rights, doesn't matter if they don't enforce it. And at this point, it's not even at that point. So like it's the same shit. This Pepsi is dangerous. Okay. The president began it was promptly vetoed by President Johnson as unconstitutional, unnecessary, and extrajudicial, and failed of passage over the veto. Meantime, however, the breach between Congress and the president began to broaden, and a modified form of the lost bill was finally passed over the president's second veto on July 16th. Okay, so yeah, it's okay. So part of the thing is like I can see the evolution of how that has come about from this, right? Because like I was saying earlier, one, it was like, oh yes, it's poetic justice to give the slaves who are now freed the lands of their enslavers, like that, you know, that's kind of poetic justice. But also it means that the slaves don't have to come up north. But yeah, like the way, so like the way that zoning works in the United States is absolutely disgusting. Like, so I live in one of the most segregated cities in all of the United States, which is like, I don't want to say what city it is exactly, but I think some people could deduce where I lived based on some of the things that I've said in previous streams, and some of like there are hints, but yeah, like even though we have like a very high population density of a wide variety of like racial backgrounds and ethnicities, it's almost entirely segregated. It's like I grew up in a poor neighborhood, but there was like one black family in that neighborhood, even though we were a poor white neighborhood. We weren't a poor black neighborhood. And that's like, and then when you get to like suburbs and stuff like that, it absolutely is like, there were people who would see me and some of my friends who happened to be black people, because I went to a church that was predominantly African American, and so like I was hanging out with them regularly and it was fine, and like I didn't think anything was strange, and we're like walking around a mall and we just keep getting fucking looks, and I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Because, you know, like I'm like a 10-year-old kid at that point. I'm just hanging out with my friend. What from my point of view, I'm hanging out with my friend. From like old white people in the mall that we're at, they're looking at, you know, hoodlums. The nice Twitch version that won't get people mad at me. Yeah. Yeah. My schooling, the public schooling system here has a problem with that too. But there were some, like there are some schools that are like almost entirely black. Like you would think that segregation was still happening. Like in the books, but that's where the zoning comes in. Oh no, if you happen to live in that neighborhood, you can totally go to, you know, we'll call it like Abraham Lincoln High, right? You can totally go to Abraham Lincoln High, where all of the, you know, where all of the people in this neighborhood live. But if the neighborhood is 90% white, most of the students there are going to be white. And if you're a young African American person and you're going to school with all of these white kids, you're likely to get bullied. And I mean, like same thing goes to the other things. Like people will bully people for a plethora of reasons. It doesn't have to always be about that, but you're still not going to feel, you know, inclusive. Like that's going to be bad. And by and large, cities have done that on purpose. They've done it on purpose. It's a feature, not a bug of the system. Okay, let's see. So they got a good bill through. They finally got the bill through. It was kind of hilarious to think that they would only need the bill for the duration of the war and 1 year. we're gonna end slavery and fully integrate the freed slaves into society within 1 year of the war being over. That's a lofty fucking goal. We're gonna undo centuries of slavery in 1 year and the duration of the war. Okay, so the Act of 1866 gave the Freedmen's Bureau its final form, the form by which it will be known to posterity and judged of men. It extended the existence of the Bureau to July. July 1868. When did okay. They gave them 2 more years to end. They gave them 2 more years. Oh my God. It authorized additional assistant commissioners, the retention of Army officers mustered out of regular service, the sale of certain forfeited lands to freedmen on nominal terms, the sale of Confederate public property for Negro schools, and a wider field of judicial interpretations and cognizance. The government of the unreconstructed South was thus put very largely in the hands of the Freedmen's Bureau, especially as, in many cases, the departmental military commander was now made also assistant commissioner. It was thus that the Freedmen's Bureau became a full-fledged government of men. It made laws, executed them, and interpreted them. It laid out and collected taxes, defined and punished crime, maintained and used military force, and dictated such measures as it thought necessary and proper for the accomplishments of its varied ends. Naturally, all of these powers were not exercised continuously nor to their fullest extent, and yet, as General Howard said, scarcely any subject that has to be legislated upon in civil society failed, at one time or another, to demand the action of this singular bureau. So they did everything. It was its own mini government inside the government. To understand and criticize intelligently so vast a work, one must not forget an instant the drift of things in the later 60s. Lee had surrendered, Lincoln was dead, and Johnson and Congress were at loggerheads. The 13th Amendment was adopted, the 14th pending, the 15th declared in force in 1870. Guerrilla raiding, the ever-present flickering afterflame of the war, was spending its forces against the Negroes, and all the southern land was awakening as from some wild dream to poverty and social revolution. In a time of perfect calm, amid willing neighbors and streaming wealth, the social uplifting of our 4 million slaves to an assured and self-sustaining place in the body politic and economic would have been a Herculean task. But when the inherent difficulties of so delicate and nice a social operation were added, the spite and hate of conflict, the hell of war, when suspicion and cruelty were rife and gaunt hunger wept beside bereavement, in such a state, the work of any instrument of social regeneration was in large part foredoomed to failure. The very name of the Bureau stood for a thing in the South which for 2 centuries and better men had refused even to argue, that the life amid free Negroes was simply unthinkable, the maddest of experiments. So yeah, so this is a problem with keeping all of the slaves who are now freed people in the South, and then the war ends. There's a bunch of people who now see the freed slaves as just a constant reminder of their failure and how times have changed and they are failing to change with them, and property that they once held now owned property that used to be theirs too. Like, it's just rubbing salt into the wound of any Southern Confederate leaning person. And I mean, fuck those people. But what did the United States government think would happen? What did they think would happen when the people who just lost this war and are being forced to accept these laws that they literally just went to a war over are going to do to the people that are living in their communities? Like, sure, Washington can say everything it wants, but at the end of the day, Washington is hundreds of miles away, and former slave Jimmy, who is now, you know, working his farm that he owns based on the state, is right over there, and you have a gun. What is Washington going to do to stop you from shooting Jimmy and taking his shit? The Freedmen's Bureau, hopefully, probably, if they get there in time, Oops. I would probably not have put the slaves in the South once they became freed. But what were they going to do with all that land? They needed that land to be worked so that it could continue producing products, consumer stuff for the United States, to trade, to fund the war effort, to it all eats in on itself. It's like an Ouroboros. Okay. I ranted enough. We've got about a third of the way. We've got about a third left. The agents that the Bureau could command varied all the way from unselfish philanthropists to narrow-minded busybodies and thieves. And even though it be true that the average was far better than the worst, it was the occasional fly that helped spoil the ointment. Yeah, like, you're gonna get shitty people. Like, shitty people exist. People who will look out for themselves. Is that by and large the most people in the world? No. No. But they're the ones you remember. If you had 50 interactions in a day and one person called you a motherfucker, you're going to remember that guy. You're not going to remember, you know, the 25 pleasant nods, hellos, and all that kind of thing. You're going to be like, man, this asshole came up today, pushed me, and called me a motherfucker. Because that's different. Venomid. Then amid all crouched the freed slave, bewildered between friend and foe. He had emerged from slavery, not the worst slavery in the world, not a slavery that made all life unbearable, rather a slavery that had been here and there something of a kindliness, fidelity, and happiness, but withal slavery, which so far as human aspirations and desert were concerned, classed the black man and the ox together. And the Negro knew full well that whether their deeper convictions may have been, Southern men had fought with desperate energy to perpetrate this slavery under which the black masses, with half-articulate thought, had writhed and shivered. They welcomed freedom with a cry. They shrank from the master who still strove for their chains. They fled to the friends that had freed them, even though those friends stood ready to use them as a club for driving the reluctant South back into loyalty. Okay, I have something to say. I have something to say about this. In the next and final video that I will be putting out in my Black History series, I'm talking about a soldier from the American Revolution who fought on the side of the British because the British were offering freedom to slaves that offered it, and you know, that would join them and fight as loyalist soldiers. And that was better than anything that the colonial army was offering. To my knowledge, there's only one unit of slaves that attained their freedom by serving as soldiers, and they actually only served as a defense force for Boston, as kind of like peacekeepers and like patrolling the streets and making sure that you know, like the martial law was inflicted. And that was it. It was one group from the colonial side. But the thing is, in no case were slaves freed purely because it was the right and moral thing to do. It was always to be used as a weapon against a greater threat. In the case of the British government against the colonialists, and in the case of the Union against the Confederacy. I am so happy because I wrote a line in that video that was basically that sentence. And it fills me with joy. This is like one of those affirming things that I'm just like, oh, I got that one right. I got that one right. Okay. Yeah. So the cleft between the white and black South grew. Idle to say it never should have been. It was as inevitable as its results were pitiable. Curiously, incongruous elements were left arrayed against each other. The North, the government, the carpetbagger, and the slave, here and there. All the South was white. All the South that was white, whether gentleman or vagabond, honest man or rascal, lawless murderer or martyr to duty. Thus, it doubtly difficult to write of this period calmly. So intense was the feeling, so mighty the human passions that swayed and blinded men. Amid it all, two figures ever stand to typify that day to coming of ages. The one, a gray-haired gentleman, whose fathers had quit themselves like men, whose sons lay in nameless graves, who bowed to the evil of slavery because its abolition threatened untold ill to all, who stood at last in the evening of life, a blighted, ruined form with hate in his eyes, and the other, a form hovering, dark and mother-like, her awful face black with the mists of centuries, had aforetime quailed at that white master's command, had bent in love over the cradle of his sons and daughters, and closed in death the sunken eyes of his wife. I, too, at his behest, and had laid herself low for his lust, and born a 20-man child to the world, only to see her dark boy's limbs scattered into the winds by the midnight marauders riding after damned racial slur that I'm not gonna say because I'm reading this on Twitch. You gotta give me a pass on this one. Please. These were the saddest sights of that woeful day, and no man clasped the hands of these two passing figures of the present past, but hating they went to their long home, and hating their children's children live today. It's not all going to be depressing. But boy howdy, sometimes it sure is. Here then was the field work for the Freedmen's Bureau, and since with some hesitation it was continued by the Act of 1868 until 1869, they keep they keep adding extra time because they realize that this centuries of issues aren't going to be solved in a year plus 3 plus 1 more. They just keep, they're like, wait a second. No, we need more. Let us look upon 4 years of its work as a whole. There were in 1869 900 Bureau officials scattered from Washington to Texas, ruling directly and indirectly many millions of men. The deeds of these rulers fall mainly under 7 heads: the relief of physical suffering, the overseeing of the beginnings of free labor, the buying and selling of land, the establishment of schools, the paying of bounties, the administration of justice, and the financing of all these activities. Up to June 1869, over 500,000 patients have been treated by the Bureau physicians and surgeons, and 60 hospitals and asylums had been in operation. In 50 months, 21 million free rations were distributed at a cost of over $4 million. And this is in, keep in mind, this is in 1869 money. $1 million, while it may not be a lot in terms of mass like government type spending today, in 1869, $4 million. I'm actually gonna, okay, inflation from 1869 to today. Excuse me while I do something real quick. Okay. 2, 3, 4, 5. That's so that's $82 million in today's money, which is, you know, not like not a small amount of money by any stretch of the imagination. I've been sitting on my foot, cross-legged on this chair, and it got a little uncomfortable. So sorry. You can see my knee now. My sweat-painted knee. Yeah, so yeah, $82,689 over in free food. Next came the difficult question of labor. First, 30,000 black men were transported from the refugees and relief stations back to the farms, back to the critical trial of a new way of working. Plain instructions went out from Washington. The laborers must be free to choose their employers. No fixed rate of wages was prescribed, and there was to be no peonage or forced labor. So far, so good. But where local agents differed toto kalo in capacity and character, where the personnel was continually changing, the outcome was necessarily varied. The largest element of success lay in the fact that the majority of freedmen were willing, even eager, to work. So labor contracts were written, 50,000 in a single state. Laborers advised, wages guaranteed, and employers supplied. In truth, the organization became a vast labor bureau. Not perfect indeed, notably defective here and there, but on the whole successful beyond the dreams of thoughtful men. But it was only successful because the freed people, like the former slaves, they wanted to work because they're not lazy. They're just people. And they're people who has spent their entire lives working, and now they're like, okay, we need you to work, but you're going to get paid to work. All of the things that that were denied to them were now attainable. Not easily, but before, the only way that they were going to get it was to, you know, try and escape and, you know, live under threat of, you know, being found out and returned and punished and possibly killed. Now they didn't really have to worry about that. They would work, they would get paid, and then they could do as they will. So it was successful because of how willing the laborers were to work, like they wanted to. The two great obstacles. So okay, I'm gonna go on a little bit of a rant here. If you ascribe to capitalism, the point of capitalism is to ensure that people work by having everything cost money. It costs you money to live. It costs you money to buy food, to eat. You need the money so that you can purchase goods and services, which you will use to survive and to gain enjoyment of your life. And you can get better quality through climbing up the hierarchy until eventually you become rich, except that there's only a very small few number of people that ever can manage to get that far. And then those people set up their family in perpetuity, making there less space at the top for everyone else. And one of the things is, like, we can't have things like universal basic income or anything like that, because people won't work. People will just loaf around and do nothing, except that so you've got let's take a look at this. You've got these people who have been freed, and they were forced to work their entire lives. And now there's a government body that is assisting them, feeding them, seeing to their wounds, you know, like seeing to their hospital needs, giving them education, giving them all of this. If there was any person who you might think, yeah, after going through that, given the choice, they probably wouldn't want to work. No, they wanted to. They wanted to continue working. They just wanted to be treated right. And like, you can't tell me that if you were forced to work your entire life and then you're granted your freedom and then you happily return to work, that humans left to their own devices would do fuck all and do nothing if all of their basic needs were protected. Bullshit. Bull fucking shit. W.E.B. Du Bois has something to fucking say about that, and he said it in fucking 1893. I think this one was released. I'll have to take a look at that. But hot damn. Come on now. Come on. Come up with a better argument. The two great obstacles which confronted the officials were the tyrant and the idler. The slaveholder, who was determined to perpetuate slavery under another name, and the freedman, who regarded freedom as a perpetual rest, the devil and the deep sea. In the work of establishing the Negroes as peasant proprietors, the Bureau was from the first handicapped and last absolutely checked. Something was done and larger things were planned. Abandoned lands were leased so long as they remained in the hands of the Bureau, and a total revenue of nearly $500,000 derived from the black tenants. Some other lands which the nation had gained title were sold on easy terms, and the public lands were open for settlement to the very few freedmen who had tools and capital. But the visions of 40 acres and a mule, the righteous and reasonable ambition to become a landholder, which the nation had all but categorically promised the freedmen, was destined in most cases to bitter disappointment. And those men of marvelous hindsight who are today seeking to preach the Negro back to the present peonage of the soil know well, or ought to know, that the opportunity of binding the Negro present willingly to the soil was lost on that day when the commissioner of the Freedmen's Bureau had to go to South Carolina and tell the weeping freedmen, after their years of toil, that their land was not theirs, that there was a mistake somewhere. If by 1874 the Georgia Negro alone owned 350,000 acres of land, it was by grace of his thrift rather than by bounty of the government. The greatest success of the Freedmen's Bureau lay in the planting of the free school among Negroes and the idea of free elementary education among all classes in the South. It not only called the schoolmistresses through the benevolent agencies and built them schoolhouses, but it helped discover and support such apostles of human culture as Edmund Ware, Samuel Armstrong, and Erastus Cravath. Cravath? Yeah, I think that's Cravath. The opposition to Negro education in the South was at first bitter and showed itself in ashes, insult, and blood, for the South believed that an educated Negro to be a dangerous Negro, and the South was not wholly wrong. I have heard this quote before. It's nice to, that's the other thing that I really enjoy about this little experiment I've been doing. Like when you come across a favorite quote in its original context and you're like, the fucking Once Upon a Time in Hollywood meme. Like, you know. For education among all kinds of men always has had and always will have an element of danger and revolution, of dissatisfaction and discontent. Nevertheless, men strive to know. Perhaps some inkling of this paradox, even in the unquiet days of the Bureau, helped the bayonets allay an opposition to human training which still today lies smoldering in the South, but not flaming. Fisk, Atlanta, Howard, and Hampton were founded in these days, and $6 million were expended for educational work, $750,000 of which the freedmen themselves gave of their poverty. Such contributions, together with the buying of land and various other enterprises, showed that the ex-slave was handling some free capital already. The chief initial source of this was labor in the army, and his pay and bounty as a soldier. Payments to Negro soldiers were first complicated by the ignorance of the recipients, and the fact that the quotas of colored regiments from the North were largely filled by recruits from the South, unknown to their fellow soldiers. Consequently, payments were accustomed by such frauds that Congress, by joint resolution in 1867, put the whole matter in the hands of the Freedmen's Bureau. In 2 years, $6 million was thus distributed to 5,000 claimants, and in the end, the sum exceeded $8 million. Even in this system, fraud was frequent, but still the work put needed capital in the hands of practical paupers, and some, at least, was well spent. So yeah, like people were ripping off. Yeah, like if you were a freed slave and you had no idea what the concept of fucking money was because you weren't given any money ever, you just did your job and like hoped and prayed that the masters didn't abuse you too much. Like the guy giving you your paycheck is going to go, yeah, here's your 50 cents. I'm going to pocket $1.50. Like, of course that's going to happen. Come on. Shit like that happens today. And we're not uneducated. The most perplexing and least successful part of the Bureau's work lay in the exercise of its judicial functions. The regular Bureau court consisted of one representative of the employer, one of the Negro, and one of the Bureau. If the Bureau could have maintained a perfectly judicial attitude, this arrangement would have been ideal, and must in time have gained confidence. But the nature of its other activities and the character of its personal prejudice, the Bureau in favor of the black litigants, and led without doubt to much injustice and annoyance. On the other hand, to leave the Negro in the hands of the Southern courts was impossible. In a distracted land where slavery had hardly fallen, to keep the strong from wanton abuse of the weak, and the weak from gloating instantly over the half-shorn strength of the strong, was a thankless, hopeless task. The former masters of the land were predominantly ordered about, seized, imprisoned, and punished over and over again with scant courtesy from army officers. The former slaves were intimidated, beaten, raped, and butchered by angry and revengeful men. Bureau courts tended to become centers simply for punishing whites, while the regular civil courts tended to become solely institutions for perpetuating the slavery of blacks. Almost every law and method ingenuity could devise was employed by the legislature to reduce the Negroes to serfdom, to make them the slaves of the state, if not individual owners. While the Bureau officials too often were found striving to put the bottom rail on top and gave the freedmen a power and independence which they could not yet use. It is all well enough for us of another generation to wax wise with advice to those who bore the burden in the heat of the day. It is full easy now to see that the man who lost home, fortune, and family at a stroke and saw his land ruled by mules and racial slurs was really befitted by the passing of slavery. It is not difficult now to say that the young freedman, cheated and cuffed about, who has seen his father's head beaten to a jelly and his own mother namelessly assaulted, that the meek shall inherit the earth. Above all, nothing is more convenient than to heap on the Freedmen's Bureau all the evils of that evil day and damn it utterly for every mistake and blunder that was made. So yeah, so this is W.E.B. Du Bois saying, like, it's easy to look back and point at something and say, look at all the bad shit that happened because of this. But if they didn't know any better, that this was a totally new experience for them, how, like, I think this is why he gave credit first, like where like he made sure, like it was some really, really chef kiss excellent writing here of like for putting at the forefront just how immense and difficult a task this was, and how the government had no idea how to even approach it, and how it changed hands so many times before finally settling in Major General Howard's hands, and just kind of like him just doing the best that he could and doing a pretty decent job for who he was and what he was able to accomplish. Like, not perfect by any means, but God, if a more corrupt person had the position, things could have easily been much worse. But in hindsight, we do know, hey, maybe don't keep people who were oppressed in the locations where they were oppressed, where the people that they were the victims of are still around and have easy access to them. You know, maybe don't do that. Maybe this is why refugee laws have kind of like come a long way, where like it's even though current administrations, more recent administrations, may have done a lot in to weaken those protections. Like, it's unlawful to send a refugee back to their country where you know that they will face immediate harm and danger. Like, we've learned a couple of things, and we could learn more. We could. We don't have to keep making the same fucking mistakes. All this is easy, but it is neither sensible nor just. Someone had blundered, but that was long before Oliver Howard was born. Fucking Christ. There was criminal aggression and heedless neglect, but without some system of control, there would have been far more than there was. Had that control been from within, the Negro would have been re-enslaved to all intents and purposes. Coming as the control did from without, perfect men and methods would have bettered all things, and even with impartial agents and questionable methods, the work accomplished was not undeserving of commendation. Not commendation, that's the opposite. Commendation. Yeah, like, I'd like to see how you do. You know, like, I couldn't do this. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I couldn't do this. Like, I would try my best, but holy shit, I don't want to be responsible for this sort of thing. Man, I do not envy. I do not envy. Such was the dawn of freedom. Such was the work of the Freedmen's Bureau, which, summed up in brief, may be epitomized as thus. For some $15 million, besides the sums spent before 1865 and the dole of benevolent societies, this bureau set going a system of free labor, establishing a beginning of peasant proprietorship, secured the recognition of black freedmen before courts of law, and founded the free common school in the South. On the other hand, it failed to begin the establishment of goodwill between ex-masters and freedmen, to guard its work wholly from paternalistic methods which discourage self-reliance, and to carry out to any considerable extent its implied promises to furnish the freedmen with land. Its successes were the result of hard work, supplemented by the aids of philanthropists and the eager striving of black men. Its failures were a result of bad local agents, the inherent difficulties of the work, and national neglect. So that's strong. That's a strong conclusion for the Bureau of Freedmen. Like, yeah, it had a lot of accomplishments, and there were some things that were doomed to failure. Like, maybe being totally, like, working with the local courts and governments to kind of like mend things between the people would have been a better option than just having the the bureau courts always side with the black complainant, plaintiff, defendant, whatever you want to say, and the local courthouses just always siding with the white people to continue the politics of the South. Like maybe having the bureau meet with the local government and having them kind of come together to discuss how things would go forward. And like, you know, like even that probably wouldn't work entirely, but it would be a lot better than just being like, no, fuck you. Like, no, this is how we're doing things now. You have to respect this man. He's right and you're wrong because you're it's like because you're from the South and you're just a racist slaver. And then going to the courts and then being like, oh, you know, you were our property and we don't respect your rights. And no, like putting in work to kind of like, but that's the thing is, I don't know how you would even go about smoothing that type of relation issue. Like, how do you do that? Such an institution, from its wide powers and great responsibilities, large control of monies, and generally conspicuous position, was naturally open to repeated and bitter attack. It sustained a searching congressional investigation at the insistence of Fernando Wood in 1870. Its archives and few remaining functions were with blunt discourtesy transferred from Howard's control. In his absence, to the supervision of the Secretary of War, Belknap, in 1872. On the Secretary's recommendation, finally, in consequence of grave imitations of wrongdoing made by the Secretary and his subordinates, General Howard was court-martialed in 1874. In both of these trials, the commissioner of the Freedmen's Bureau was officially exonerated from any willful misdoing and his work commended. Nevertheless, many unpleasant things were brought to light. The methods of transacting the business of the Bureau were faulty. Several cases of defalcation were proved and other frauds strongly suspected. There were some business transactions which... Oops, I accidentally opened developer mode. Were proved, other frauds strongly suspected. There were some business transactions which savored of dangerous speculation, if not dishonesty, and around it all lay the smirch of the Freedmen's Bank. Morally and practically, the Freedmen's Bank was part of the Freedmen's Bureau, although it had no legal connection with it. With the prestige of the government back of it and directing board of unusual respectability and national reputation, this banking institution had made a remarkable start in the development of that thrift among black folk which slavery had kept them from knowing. Then in one sad day came the crash. All the hard-earned dollars of the freedmen disappeared, but that was the least of the loss. All faith in saving went too, and much of the faith in men that was a loss that a nation which today sneers at Negro shiftlessness has never yet made good. Not even 10 additional years of slavery could have done so much to throttle the thrift of the freedmen as the mismanagement and bankruptcy of the series of saving banks chartered by the nation for their especial aid. There all the blame should rest. It's hard to say whether the Bureau and the bank died chiefly by reason of the blows of its selfish friends or the dark machinations of its foes. Perhaps even time will never reveal, for here lies unwritten history. Of the foes without the Bureau, the bittersweet were those who attacked not so much its conduct or policy under the laws as the necessity for any such institution at all. Such attacks came primarily from the border states and the South. They were all summed up by Senator Davis of Kentucky when he moved to entitle the Act of 1866, a bill to promote strife and conflict between white and black races by a grant of unconstitutional power. The argument gathered tremendous strength south and north, but its strength was its weakness. For argued the plain common sense of the nation, if it is unconstitutional, unpractical, and futile for the nation to stand guardians over its helpless wards, then there is left but one alternative, to make those wards their own guardians by arming them with the ballot. Moreover, the path of the practical politician pointed the same way. For, argued this opportunist, if we cannot peacefully reconstruct the South with white votes, we certainly can with black votes. So justice forced joined hands. The alternative thus offered the nation was not full and restricted Negro suffrage, else every sensible man, black and white, would easily have chosen the latter. It was rather a choice between suffrage and slavery. After endless blood and gold had flowed to sweep human bondage away, not a single Southern legislator stood ready to admit a Negro under any condition to the polls. Not a single Southern legislator believed free Negro labor was possible without a system of restrictions that took all its freedoms away. There was scarcely a white man in the South who did not honestly regard emancipation as a crime, and its practical nullification as a duty. In such a situation, the granting of the ballot to the black man was a necessity. The very least of a guilty nation could warrant a wronged race, and the only method of compelling the South to accept the results of the war. Thus, Negro suffrage ended a civil war by beginning a race feud, and some felt gratitude towards the race thus sacrificed in its swaddling clothes on the altar of national integrity, and some felt and feel only indifference and contempt. Had political exigencies been less pressing, the opposition to government guardianship of Negroes less bitter, and the attachment to the slave system less strong, the social seer can well imagine a far better policy. A permanent Freedmen's Bureau with a national system of Negro schools, a carefully supervised employment and labor office, a system of impartial protections before the regular courts, and such institutions for social betterment as savings banks, lands and building association, and social settlements. All this vast expenditure of money and brains might have formed a great school of prospective citizenship and solved in a way we have not yet solved the most perplexing and persistent of the Negro problems. That such an institution was unthinkable in 1870 was due in part to certain acts of the Freedmen's Bureau itself. It came to regard its work as merely temporary, and Negro suffrage as a final answer to all present perplexities. The political ambition of many of its agents and protégés led it far afield into questionable activities, until the South, nursing its own deep prejudices, came easily to ignore all the good deeds of the Bureau and hate its very name with perfect hatred. So the Freedmen's Bureau died, and its child was the 15th Amendment. The passing of a great human institution before its work is done, like the untimely passing of a single soul, but leaves a legacy of striving for other men. The legacy of the Freedmen's Bureau is the heavy heritage of this generation. Today, when new and vaster problems are destined to strain every fiber of the national mind and soul, would it not be well to count this legacy honestly and carefully? For this much all men know, despite compromise, war, and struggle, the Negro is not free. In the backwoods of the Gulf states, for miles and miles, he may not leave the plantation of his birth. In well nigh the whole rural South, the black farmers are peons, bound by the law and customs to an economic slavery from which the only escape is death or the penitentiary. In the most cultured sections and cities of the South, the Negroes are segregated servile castes with restricted rights and privileges. Before the courts, both in law and custom, they stand on a different and peculiar basis. Taxation without representation is the rule of their political life. And the result of all this is, and in nature must have been, lawlessness and crime. That the large legacy of the Freedmen's Bureau, the work it did not do because it could not. I have seen a land right merry with the sun, where the children sang and rolling hills lie like passioned women wanton with harvest. And here in the king's highways sat and sits a figure veiled and bowing, by which the travelers' footsteps hasten as they go. On the tainted air broods fear. 3 centuries' thought has been raising the unveiling of that bowed human heart, and now behold a century new for the duty and the deed. The problem of the 12th century is the problem of the colored line. Okay, so that's the end of part 2. Okay. So we talked a lot during that about stuffs like, one, interesting that I've never heard of the Freedmen's Bureau before. Right now, today, February 17th, the year of our Lord 2022. Never heard of it. Not even once, not even in mention, not in any school book. Literally never. And why is that? The Freedmen's Bureau to me seems to be a like a framework for like almost a socialist kind of government that existed within the government itself, aimed at improving the lives of the newly freed slaves, catching them up to speed with the rest of the nation so that they could integrate successfully and live happy, healthy, full lives. And my contention is that if we are going to have governments, this is the role that they should be playing for all of us. They should be wholly and 100% concerned with the health, safety, and happiness of their people. And so I think that kind of the very existence of the Freedmen's Bureau kind of goes against like the thought of capitalism, even though it was kind of designed to basically let the government continue to profit off of the backs of these now freed slaves while giving them money and access to some of the fruits of their labors, but not all of them. We don't want to remember this. It seems that we don't want to remember this. And that's, and so the other person, one of the other people I talked about was Elaine Brown, and she's still alive. But in the 70s, she was a member of the Black Panther Party, which was a communist, Marxist-Leninist based, group of people operating around the globe. Well, not around the globe, around the United States of America, but they did talk with other people, other communist groups around the world. So, but they were literally instituting socialist, communist style communities in the United States, and were doing so successfully that the FBI couldn't have that and started killing them. And this is where the narrative of them just being violent, violent thugs who believed in black superiority, and they were basically the Ku Klux Klan for black people. Like, no, that wasn't it at all. Like, I could see why that sort of culture could kind of like came about. And the Freedmen's Bureau kind of like seems like that the Black Panthers is like another step, like just like further along the line of history, is just where that natural evolution went to. Now I think that like, yes, steps have been made, but we're still facing a lot of the same problems. It's the penitentiary, or the city you live in, and so now we're throwing an extra layer. We're mixing in the layers of classism and racism in today's day and age. Like, they're like they now have to face they only have Black people only have more problems today, not less. Because now that the civil rights movement is done, and old white people in Washington are like, "What are you talking about? We totally have equal rights and everything. Didn't you see? It's in the Constitution. That means we're done." But the over incarceration of Black people, the over sentencing of Black people, the like in-proportionate police violence against Black people, like, this is all coming from the same place. And W.E.B. Du Bois is talking about it in here, and we've made legislative steps, but by and large, people are still trying to push it the same way. At least that's my opinion. If you don't agree, you're welcome to, voice your opinions. When this goes up on YouTube, if people interact in the comments and want to talk about something, you can highlight a time stop and say something, or just do your general comments, and I will be reading them and getting back to them. This is like a book club. That's why I'm calling it book club. So I welcome the discourse. I want to talk, and see other people's points of view, as long as they are not like racist. As long as your point of view isn't racist, and I think slavery is good, then I'm willing to have a discussion with you. And that's it. So thank you everybody for watching. I want to shout out to my boy Eggs Fried Reese for stopping by. I really appreciate you, and I always get excited when I see you stream and I'm at work, because I get to kill the last 45 minutes just being real chill with a cool group of people. So go check out Eggs Fried Reese. He plays a lot of Pokemon based on most of the streams I've caught have been Pokemon. So I think I did see him playing Genshin Impact. So if you like your Breath of the Wild style gacha waifus, Eggs Fried Reese is your main man for that. Also, I'd like to thank Mayhem's Mistress. She rated me the other day. She is a queer polyam streamer from the Canadas, and tomorrow she will be streaming her weekly Friday night fright, I believe. And last time, she's still going through Five Nights at Freddy's. So and it's her first run through of the first game. I think she's on night 4, so she's only got 2 nights left. So we're really pulling for her. I'll be there tomorrow while I am struggling to get my new PC, baby boy over here, fixed up and running. Now, as always, 1, happy Black History Month. 2, please support, please consider supporting, either like Bail Fund and NAACP, the Black Lives Matter, some activists or the Martha B. Johnson Institute, engagement. That video that I did earlier in the month, there are plenty of good causes to support this month, and there are also Black people there are LGBT Black people who also face discrimination on multiple fronts, and there are many organizations dedicated to helping those people out as well. And it would mean a lot. It would mean the world to me if you would consider helping those types of organizations dedicated to helping the most vulnerable people among us. Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming and for watching this on the YouTubes, if that's where you are. Stay safe, get vaccinated if you can, and remember, I loves you. Let's see if we can raid somebody, and then I'm going to get out of here. Always happy to see you. And thank you for chatting. I really appreciate it. I am while I get the raid together, just to, you know, hit it because I like doing this. I am pushing to get affiliate, and to do that I need an average of 3 streamers. Now the thing is that if you don't chat, it doesn't count. An average of 3 streamers. If you're just hanging out if you're just hanging out and lurking, but you don't actually type anything, Twitch is lame and doesn't count that as a viewer for whatever reason. I do not know why. It is maddeningly infuriating. Even though most of the time when I like check my who's in chat, it's oh, okay, yeah. So although one of the things is when I check, sometimes I just like pop and check the user, the like who's in chat, and then I see like a bunch of names, and it's like I'm like, oh, those are bots checking if my music violates DMCA's. Well, let's see. Who is the wizard? I think they were a raid. I think they were someone that one of my other friends raided. So I'm going to raid the wizard with 2 Z's. Ah, okay. It was just like, well, get ready. Get ready to go say hi to the wizard real quick, even if it's just for a little bit. Thank you. Mwah.